So when you've unpacked your Brown's gas machine, the first thing to do is to plug it in. So I've used the power cable to plug into the back, and you can see here there's also a little on-off switch. So in a moment when I switch that on, you'll hear 3 quick bleeps, and then you know the machine is plugged in and ready to go. So here we go. There we go, 3 quick bleeps. And then the next thing to do is to attach this drainage tube. And this attaches to the outlet little kind of attachment here. So this is a little cap, and I'm just going to pull and twist until that kind of comes off. It might feel a bit tight. So that's just a little cap which you can then put somewhere safe. And you then just plug in this water drainage tube, and so I plug that into here. You might need to twist it and push it so it's firmly on, and there we go. Now just make sure when this arrives, it should be so that the little kind of lever there is pointing to the side. This means that it's closed, and if you twist it this way, it opens the valve, and you want it closed because the next thing we're going to do is to fill up the tank with water. And what you don't want to do is be filling the tank up here and then the water coming straight out through this drainage tube. So when it comes to filling the tank up with water, it's really important that you only use distilled water. So we have some distilled water here, and you can use deionized water, which you can buy from garages, but whatever the water is that you use, whether it's distilled water or deionized water, it's a good idea to test it with a little TDS meter like this before you put it into the machine. And the reason for that is a lot of the water that you buy, even though it says distilled water, won't always be pure enough. And ideally, if you want your machine to have the longest lifespan, you want it to have a reading of 0 on one of these TDS meters. So TDS actually stands for total dissolved solids. And these machines will actually run with anything round about a reading of 1 or even 2, 3 or 4. And the machine, if it had too much dissolved solids in it and too much contamination, it would actually indicate on its own meter, which you can see in a moment when we have a look at it, that the water isn't pure enough. But in the interest of the longevity of your machine, the purer the water, the less calcification that builds up over use, and therefore your machine will run smoother and for a lot longer as well. So our advice is, yes, if you buy some water and you test it and it's 1 part per million or 2 or 3, it will work. But if you can find a source of water which is 0 parts per million, then this will give you the longest lifespan for your machine. So if you're not sure on how to use one of these, they're very simple. So you take the cap off the bottom. I'm going to switch it on. And this particular one has the option of testing the pH balance, which is the acid and alkaline balance, as well as testing TDS, which is that total dissolved solids. So I'm going to press the mode button to put it onto parts per million. And then the way to do it is you just put it into the water, and I've just got a bit of water in here, stir it a little bit, and then just let it settle. And so that is coming up at 1 part per million at the moment. So that would actually be okay to run the machine. And in some instances, what you might find is that if you've used this pen to actually test normal tap water or some other water, it might be there's sometimes a bit of contamination on there which you bring into the water. So sometimes you might have water which is 0, but it only goes up to 1 because of a bit of contamination or dust or something that you brought into it with the meter itself. When it comes to also what you put the water in, just make sure it is clean as well, because if this is still wet with, say, tap water from washing it, or it's been sitting and gathered a bit of dust, this will also make the reading a little bit less than 0, and that's often the reason why you don't get 0 every time. So the next thing to do is, once you know you've got the water at 0 parts per million, or at least less than 5, you're ready to start filling up the tank. So I've turned the machine around, so we're now looking at the front of the machine here, and we can see the screen. And there is a little panel on the front here, and in some of our other machines, that panel allows you to see how much water you're putting into the tank. This machine doesn't allow you to see that, so there's a slightly different way that you know when your tank is full. And the way that we do that is to use an indicator that comes up on the display once we've switched it on. So here in the bottom right hand corner, you've got your on-off button. So if I press that, you'll see the screen come on, and what we can do is then go to the cap here and we turn it 90 degrees anti-clockwise, and then the cap can come off, and then we can put our water in. And you might, if I zoom in a little bit, be able to see there's a little red flashing light here, and this is the indicator that the water is either too high or too low. So the fact that it's flashing and the machine is empty is telling us that the machine needs to have water added to it. And the way that we do that is we keep adding water into the machine until that little red flashing light disappears, and then we know that we've got the minimum amount of water in there. Now if we keep filling the machine up, the red light will come back on again, indicating that you've just filled it with too much water. And if you've got too much water in the machine won't operate. So the tank needs a little bit of space in there, which is where the oxygen will form. And if the water is too high, then the machine doesn't produce the oxygen properly, and in actual fact the machine won't switch on and work, and it will indicate with that light coming back on. So once you've got the machine to the level where you've filled it to the point where this light comes back on, you then go to your tubing at the back where we put the that little valve, and we just drain the water back out a little bit until that light switches off. And then we know that the tank is completely full, but we haven't overfilled it. Now, when you're filling the tank up, it's tempting to just take the water straight from a big kind of container like this and just pour it straight in. It's actually better for the machine to actually use a jug like this and just kind of add the water quite gently, and then you add a bit more water and then keep adding through the jug. What you don't want to do is fill the tank up too quickly. The manufacturers say it's better to fill it up gently because there is the possibility that water can get into parts of the machine that it shouldn't if you're pouring it too aggressively into the machine. So I'm going to fill that tank up until the red light goes off, and then I'm going to keep filling it until the red light switches off again. So I've just finished filling up the tank, and the tank on this machine is quite big. It can take something in the region of about 3 litres of water to fill it up. So that meant putting about 6 jugs of water in total, because each of the jugs that I had was roughly 500 millilitres. And when I reached the upper limit, there was a little bleep, and that little red light has come back on. But I've turned the machine around, so we're looking at the back of the machine. And if I just zoom in, you can possibly see that the flashing light, which is up here, has come back on. So we can now put the cap back on. And so we essentially now turn it 90 degrees clockwise. And that is now a very sealed unit. Now the reason I put the cap back on is to illustrate something about the drainage of the machine. So if I zoom back a little bit, so now that the machine's got a little bit too much water in, all we do now is use the drainage tube to drain a little bit out, and then we know that the tank is at the correct level. So we've got the drain tube or drainage tube at the back here. I've got my jug. So I'm just going to put the drain tube into the jug, and you can hold it so that it's a little bit below the machine, but it should still work here. And if I was to just turn the valve to open it, a little bit of water will come out, and then it will usually stop. And that's because the lid here creates a complete seal so that no oxygen or air can get in. So in order for us to drain anything significantly out, we need to have the lid released or at least open. So I just wanted to make that clear by showing you that. So if I now turn it anti-clockwise, just release the seal, we've now got the water draining out. Hopefully you can see that. And I'm looking at the light, and the light has now gone out, so I can close it. So now I only needed to drain out just a little bit of water, and the tank is now completely full and ready to go. And the only other time you might need to use the drainage tube, other than if you overfill it and just need to then drain a little bit of water out as we've done, is if you are traveling with the machine. You always want to drain and empty the tank completely if you're traveling with it. If you're just carrying this machine to another room, that's fine. Just try to keep it upright and not to give it too much kind of movement, because if the water is sloshing around inside, there is the ability for water to get into parts of the machine that it shouldn't get into, and that can lead to potential problems for the machine. So keep the machine relatively still if you're just carrying it from room to room, and definitely empty the machine of all the water in the tank if you're going to be traveling and taking it somewhere with you. On your machine, at the top here, there is a little bit of writing that suggests that it's a good idea to change the water in the tank every 3 to 5 days. Now, this is the kind of advice that is now a little bit out of date. So this was the advice that used to be given to machines that didn't have a meter inside to monitor the purity of the water. So it was just a good idea to empty the machine periodically just to make sure that nothing was going wrong with the purity of the water inside the machine. But this machine, if for any reason the water became either contaminated or for any reason which I can't think of any reasons why it should, but if the water did become to a level where it wasn't pure enough, the machine would actually have an indicator that would come on. The machine would also not operate until the water was changed. So there's no likelihood that you could be running the machine and ignoring the indicator. And it's simply a case of changing the water and then the machine will run properly. So with that technology, we now say to people that you can run the machine, keep topping it up with water. You don't need to change it every 3 to 5 days. The only time you need to maybe change the water is if you haven't used the machine for a long period of time, such as 3, 4, 5 or 6 months or longer. It is a good idea just to change the water if it hasn't been used for that long. And so you do that in exactly the same way. You just take the cap off and just drain it into a big jug or small jug and just then keep putting it back into its bigger container. So that's the only reason why you might need to drain it, if you're traveling or if it becomes contaminated. So the next part in the setting up is in your accessories, you'll find a screwdriver, 2 little screws and 2 brackets. And the screwdriver and the screws are used to attach these brackets to the back of the machine, here and here, which I'm going to show you in a moment. And then you've got 2 kind of beakers which you need to fill up with distilled water. And you can't probably see it on the video, but there's a minimum and a maximum marker. As long as it's between the two, that's all you need to do. So they're basically towards the lower end of the range that it needs to be in. So all you do is put the distilled water in, you just screw the lid on, make sure it's very tight. So if those aren't tight enough, sometimes you get the Brown's gas leaks a little bit and you don't get the full power coming into the cannula or into the water stone. So I'm going to take the screwdriver and one of these brackets. I'm going to put the screw into the center and then we're going to basically screw it into the machine. So there's the first one, nice and tight, and the next one. Lovely. So you've got nice and tight, nice and firm. You've got your brackets in place, and those brackets are there to hold these beakers. And you can either just push them in, or you can try and slide them. I would advise not trying to slide them down, because the pressure, this is not a very strong bracket that's holding it for force going downwards. So it's better to kind of push it this way on. So it might, there you go. And they're both in place. And that's the next part of your setting up completed. So for the next stage of the setting up, we go to these little plugs which are here. So you can probably, when you get closer and you look on your own machine, one of these says O2, which is the oxygen. You just take that plug out, and the other one here is H2, which is hydrogen. And in your accessories, you'll have 2 long bits of tube and 2 smaller bits of tubing and a little Y adapter. And simply, all we're going to do is connect this to one of the tops of the beaker and that one to the other one, and then the longer tubing will be attached to here. And once that's done, we're ready to go. So it's just simply a case of plug in here and there. Same on this one. And what you can do for the next two, these longer ones, you can just plug them straight in to each of the tubes. But because you're going to turn the machine around and you're going to want this to come around the front, my suggestion is turn these to the side. Whoops. Just clicked in place. And then what you can do is attach one of them like that, and the other one just goes behind and attaches here. And then the Y adapter, they each plug in to one of those. And so then this easily goes around the side of the machine, and it's less kind of getting in the way of other cables and other bits of tubing. In your accessories, you will find a little bracket that looks like this. And it will come with a little screw. And the idea is this water drainage tube, rather than just kind of being in the way everywhere, this is a bracket that you'll see a little hole which is about here. This bracket will screw into that hole, and it just allows you to have this drainage tube out the way, so it's just not kind of flapping around and being a nuisance. So if I show you how that is done, so we use the screwdriver. So that is attached. And then you can take the drainage tube, I'm going to put it just behind the power, and then it's quite easy to just slot it in like that. And I might need to do it a little bit tighter, but it just means that the drainage tube can slot into that, and it just keeps it out of the way when you're not using it. So we've turned the machine around, and we've got the little tubes going into the top of each of those beakers, and both of those are attached with the other cables, or I should say tubing, into that Y adapter. And then into that Y adapter we're going to plug either the Waterstone or the cannula, or in your accessories, and I'll show you this in a moment, you have a pair of earplugs and a set of goggles. They can all be plugged into this, but we need to just have a look at the screen to begin with and just have a closer look at the control panel. So this is obviously your on-off switch. You can set your time here. Now as soon as you press time, it starts running, and you can then press it a number of times to increase the amount of time, and you'll be able to see how much time that you've set on this display here, and then it will count down and switch itself off. This is the purity of the gas that's coming out. So if that starts to for any reason drop, then it might indicate there's something going wrong with the machine. But that should almost always be at 99.99%. What we have here will be the power output of the machine. So you should see that come up at 1,800 millilitres per minute. So if the performance of the machine starts to drop for any reason, then you'll see that number start to decrease. So the machine will be giving you indicators if something's not correct in terms of purity or power output. And what you've got here is just the running total of how many hours the machine has been used. Now, before we receive the machine, the manufacturers actually do a testing of the machine, which is why when it arrives to us, it always has usually a 1 in the thing there. That means that it's had an hour of use. So the manufacturers make sure that before it's sent to us, they've run the machine for an hour just to make sure that it doesn't break or some fault or leak has developed. We always test every machine before we send it out. So you know you're getting a brand new machine if this arrives with either a 0 or a 1. If for any reason, and this wouldn't happen with us, but with this particular machine, if you bought a machine and someone said it was brand new and you could see on the clock here that it had like 40 hours of use, then you know that that machine isn't brand new. So this is telling you that with the 1 here that it has been tested, and you're buying a machine that is working at least at the point of sending it to you. So if I press the time button, you'll see these little flashing blue indicators. That's an indicator that everything is running. You can see this has come up with 1800, which means that's the power output. You've got a green light that comes on, and if I zoom in just a little bit, that actually says TDS next to it. Now, if that green light changes to be a different color, the machine will stop, and it's an indicator that the water purity isn't good enough. So this green light is indicating that the TDS, which is total dissolved solids, the water is pure enough at the moment. And if I wanted to increase the time, so it starts off at 1, which is 1 hour, I just press the time button again, and I can take it up to 2, up to 3, up to 4, and then it should come back to 0 again, and that switches it off. But if you had started it and you wanted to switch it off earlier than the time you set, you can just press this button here, and that just switches the whole thing off. So one of the things that is a good idea with this is once you've switched it on and you press the time, it's a good idea to let the machine run for about 1 minute before you actually put the cannula on. The other thing it has is a child lock. So if I press child lock and hold it for about 3 to 5 seconds, that locks everything in place. So now if I press this button, it won't switch it off, nothing changes until I hold the child lock again, and then I can use the panel to switch it off if I want to. So what I've done now is I have attached the water stone, which is here, which comes with this lovely clear tubing which you attach to the Y connector, and then you can use that to make Brown's gas water. So I've got a glass here which I put some just normal standard filtered water into the glass. So when you're making your Brown's gas water, you don't need to use distilled water. You can if you want to, but you can use virtually any water as long as it's not straight from the tap. So it could be a simple Brita filter, reverse osmosis water, spring water, mineral water. Just avoid using tap water. So there's too many contaminants in it, and that can cause a reaction with the Brown's gas. So once you've got the water stone in there, I'm just going to press on, press time, so it just starts running, and then You'll see once it's running that you can see kind of bubbles in the tank here, and it can take a couple of seconds, but the bubbling will come into the water, and it's generally the case that you will let that run for anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes, and then you can drink the water. If you had the idea that you wanted to make some Brown's gas water and then drink it later on, such as in an hour or 2 hours time, you're not going to have much Brown's gas left in the water. So you need to drink it straight away in order to make sure you get the full amount of Brown's gas in the water. So here we can really see the power output from this machine. So most of you watching this won't have necessarily been able to appreciate how powerful that is, but having seen different machines with different power outputs produce Brown's gas and hydrogen into water, I can tell you that's a nice, really powerful output into the water there. So I've now set the machine up to use a cannula, and all I did for that was go to the Y adapter, unplug the water stone which I had in, and then just plug in the cannula, and it's as simple as that. And if you trace the line of the cannula, you'll get to a little cylinder like this. This is something that is designed to catch any water droplets that might form through the process of condensation. You don't need to fill that with anything, but if you ever need to empty it, you basically just twist and then pull it apart, and you'll be able to empty any water and then bring it back together again. Push and turn. But if you follow it all the way around, you get to the nose piece that goes into the nostrils. And what you might be able to see with that is there's the two bits that go into the nostrils, and there's a little bit that is like a little flap, and that should point down towards the lips. So when you put this on, it should wrap around the ears like this, and mainly when people buy these machines, it's a combination of drinking the Brown's gas water alongside the inhalation, which is the kind of the combination that works the best. And then you've got the option of adding in the goggles and the earplugs. And when you want to use those, if you decide that you want to use those at any time, you just detach the cannula and you plug whichever thing you want to use into that Y adapter. So essentially everything you need to do plugs into the Y adapter, and then you just switch it on, select your time and let it run. And you can always child lock it if you want to, and you can just switch it off early if you want to as well. All you need to do is just keep an eye on the water in the cups sitting on the back, and just make sure they don't go below minimum, otherwise the power output will drop. And if the tank does run and get too low, it will indicate with some bleeping, the machine will switch off, and there will be a little flashing light on the screen that will tell you that you need to top it up. And then when you do that, you can just follow the instructions as I did in the setting up. So you just keep adding water until that light disappears. You keep going until the light comes back on again, and then you drain the water out until the light switches off, and then your water tank is full back up again. But the water tank, if you didn't just periodically top it up, it will probably, depending on how often you use the machine, run for quite a long time before you need to top it up.